of interconnected opposites, of pleasure and pain. So it's our identity that is attached to pleasure, 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 and feels heavily assaulted and attacked when life delivers pain, that simply can't accept life as it is. Now, that's part of life. That non-acceptance is part of life. So these explanations here are explanations that hopefully become part of our conditioning, part of what we can refer to as the working mind as opposed to the thinking mind. The thinking mind is the part of the body-mind organism that has these false ideas about life and oneself in them. So that the thinking mind is where all the suffering stems from, where the non-acceptance of life as it is stems from. The working mind is the functional, practical part of the intellect. And these talks are simply new conditioning. New conditioning that can become part of the working mind. And as the working mind then goes through, or as the human goes through its day, it starts seeing daily life according to the concepts that have been put forward, the concepts that have become part of the working mind. So the working mind is the functional part of the mind. So the part of the mind that would book a taxi a certain number of hours before to pick you up, to take you to the airport. It calculates these things. It knows how much money to take on holiday. It decides what food to buy. And it's also the part of the mind that starts to absorb spiritual pointers, spiritual teachings. And as the thinking mind pops up and starts blaming the other, the working mind might say, this is suffering. Because the working mind has also been informed, equipped with a concept that says suffering is an uncomfortableness with oneself, an uncomfortableness with the other, an uncomfortableness that arises in the form of guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation, all of which are based on the premise that I am the doer and the other is the doer, and that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. All of which not seeing that life is unfolding according to a much bigger picture that you and I are intrinsically part of and not in control of. And so the working mind, when the suffering arises, might catch it out and say, look, there's blame. Now, these concepts are not saying that we should resist suffering, that we should resist the false beliefs. That resistance is a job of the thinking mind. These are just descriptions. And even a description about something less favorable or less optimal is just a description. The doership in us, the attachment to outcome in us, here's a description of something not so optimal, like a belief that leads to suffering, and it says, okay, I'm going to fix that. It's not up to a doer to fix it, because the doer doesn't exist. The doer is just a belief system that says, I'm going to fix it. So the working mind understands its job is not to fix it. What it's doing is just observing what's happening according to some information it's being given that allows it to now know the sort of shape or flavor of certain things. So very much like a student, a science student that's about to go out on a field trip, and before they're let out onto the field trip, they're given descriptions about, the blue-breasted jay, the certain lizard with a, forked tail. And so all the descriptions are given, and then they're also told where to find those, under a rock or in a certain tree. And then they see them, and that's the working mind would say, that's the such and such lizard, and that's the blue-breasted jay. And you don't need to do anything about it. You don't have to catch it or kill it. It's just to see it. So the working mind starts to see the thinking mind in action. And it also starts to pop up thoughts, such as a thought, actually, I'm not the doer and the other isn't the doer. And the thinking mind suffering, the blame, is saying, you are the doer. You did this according to your own free will, your own volition as a separate independent entity. It delivered pain to me and I hate you. And the working mind might say, actually, I'm not the doer and the other isn't the doer. And that thought that says, I'm not the doer and the other isn't, has the potential to cut off the suffering. But it's not an intentional action to bring about a certain outcome. It's just the arising automatically of the working mind in action, because the working mind has been conditioned a certain way. And the consequence, not our doing, but just a consequence of the working mind now starting to function differently to the thinking mind, is that the beliefs at the root of the thinking mind can start to weaken. So this isn't actually a process that you have to work hard on. You don't have to leave the talk and get to work diligently. You have no homework once you leave. And with the attitude that you have nothing to do except to function in each moment exactly the way that you're designed to function according to the circumstance you find yourself in. Which isn't really an instruction for you to do, it's a description of what will happen automatically. You know, you leave the building and you find yourself on the street, and it isn't an instruction to do anything, it's a description that in each moment we will function exactly according to our design and the circumstance we find ourselves in. So given our design, which is made up of essentially our genes and up-to-date conditioning, that's what the human being is in each moment, a result of genes and up-to-date conditioning. You find yourself on the street, and the body understands that it has to be careful of cars, that when the light is green you can cross, when the light is red you have to wait. That's all automatic. It's not our doing. It's a functioning that we have been designed to, a functioning that will happen based on our design and the circumstance. And so when the thinking mind kicks up, because a car goes through a red light, let's say, and almost hits you, and the thinking mind kicks in where there is blame for what that person has done, the working mind automatically can kick in and say, actually, your happiness is always attitudinal, not circumstantial. Meaning, your happiness is not because of circumstance, but because of your attitude to circumstance. And the blame is a certain attitude to circumstance that isn't an attitude of happiness. It's an attitude of suffering. And so when that comes up, the working mind might see it. And what could happen is a stopping of blame. On what basis? On an understanding that yes, these things happen as part of life. That I can understand it's happened to me where the person was not paying attention and missed the red light, or was in a big rush and decided that it was worth going through the red light given their circumstance. It doesn't mean it's favorable. The car could have hit you and broken your leg, could hit someone you love and kill them. So the circumstance is going to remain either pleasure or pain, and sometimes quite intense pleasure or intense pain. And the attitude towards the circumstance doesn't change the circumstance. That's why if we start to see these things more clearly, see the distinction between circumstance and our attitude, that's one of the biggest distinctions that we need to start to recognize, that there is a difference between the circumstance, which is always pleasure and pain, and our attitude to the circumstance. Then when the attitude is of blame, the working mind can kick in and say, this isn't helping me. This is just adding a load of suffering on top of the painful situation.